Well, welcome back to Conversations in Pop Culture, and we are back in the saddle once again for another season. And before I introduce my guests, I do want to remind people that this episode is brought to you by my friend Preston Poulter, who has a book called Palace of the Golden Princess, which offers a fun, sexy romp through a fantasy RPG setting run by women. And issue 3 launches soon on Kickstarter. And right now, if you go to his website, pocketjackcomics.com, and sign up for his email list, he will send you a PDF of issue 1 for free, so you could actually try it before you buy it. And if you like it, you could go back the campaign when it drops. And so go check that out if you want a free comic, and check out a cool book that I thoroughly enjoy, that I think a lot of people enjoy as well. But enough about that, because I have with me Dan Schmidt and Matthew Waterman. So welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Andrew.
I am very, very excited. Obviously, Dan, I think you've been on twice, and I'm meeting you for the first time, Matt, which is also cool. And you guys have a Kickstarter that is, I think, fully funded at this point, or pretty close to it, which is Worms Crawl Out. They're not crawling in, they're crawling out. I want to make that crystal clear.
They crawled out they crawled in the first book, and now they're on the way out.
They got to go somewhere.
Yes.
They didn't like their residence, is a nice way to put it. But obviously, all jokes aside, this is the sequel to Worms Crawl In. And so I kind of want to catch everybody up on what was Worms Crawl In for those who haven't heard about this book the first time. And then obviously we're going to dive into this second book where they're crawling out and everything that's going on. So let's catch everybody up on what the first one was, the basic story of it.
Oh, okay. Geez. I'm bad at this. So the basic story is Delane is one of the main characters, can see ghosts and talk to ghosts. Marco is a dead soul trapped in a dead body. They meet. They decide to take revenge on this criminal element that's been torturing them both. And then their mission kind of changes to one of redemption when they try to free other trapped souls. And then, of course, things happen, and and the book ends. I won't spoil it.
Fair enough.
All right.
I'm going to spoil a little bit of it, because obviously an ending occurs in the first one that is satisfying, but not pleasant, not a happy ending, might be a good way how to put it. And, obviously people grow and people evolve, and obviously these characters are fascinating, and it opens up the door for this book, which is Worms Crawl Out. And so what is that like? Because obviously something sort of happens to Marco's soul. And so what was this like? Because that's kind of where I think we're at with this series at this point.
Yeah. So this book, Worms Crawl Out, it's not really a sequel or a prequel. It takes a much deeper dive into part of the timeline of Worms Crawl In. So you don't have to read Worms Crawl In necessarily to enjoy or understand what's going on. Of course, it gives it a lot more context if you do, but it kind of takes one of those moments and really dives down deeper into what happened, the characters' motivations, and then, of course, how it connects back to the first book, Worms Crawl In.
Yeah, so let's actually talk about this, because what is this like to go back into the story and have a deeper connection and, I guess, revitalize, for lack of a better word, I feel might be a good way to put it, that kind of come back into the world you created?
I feel like, and perhaps I'm placing too much importance on myself, but this is like essentially what Star Wars does, right? They have this entire universe, and they can kind of go anywhere in their universe with stories. So for me, I think it's kind of fun to not necessarily have to tell a story in a specific linear format, like issue 1, 2, 3, 4, and just have it go like that. I can go, in any direction with it, which is what this is. So it's kind of fun to be able to, like I said, just take a moment of time and then expand on that and really build out those other events that happened. And I think it adds a little dimension of interest for readers too. Just being that it's different than what you would normally see, like I said, in a linear path.
And speaking from the outside, I'll say that's really, I think, one of the stresses or one of the great parts about Dan's writing is there's a perfect amount of ambiguity where it's not one of those stories where there's like a neat little bow on top. It's a one of those events where different people may interpret it different ways. So when Dan does this kind of deep down into the other angles of it, it really enriches the end product or puts it in a different light. I think it's a real asset to the whole experience, right?
Yeah, to even talk about this a little bit too. I mean, obviously, I think Dan, you wrote Worms Crawl In by yourself, and I think you did a lot of the artwork by yourself, and you did the whole book almost by yourself for the most part, I believe. And so, what was it like for you, Matt, coming into this one? Because obviously, bringing in a co-writer and bringing in another set of eyes, and somebody who obviously wasn't, and I say this the nicest way and hopefully the most politically correct way, wasn't there on the first one, but now is coming in with a new set of ideas and a fresh pair of eyes and saying, hey, I know that we have some establishment rules here and some establishment chronological stuff, but we could add this in here. And this is what I think. And what is that like? Because I think it sometimes helps a story when you have another writer in there and you have somebody who can throw guidance in there and steer the ship a little bit. Say, hey, let's take a little left here and a little right there.
So Matt was actually a good, really great sounding board for me on the first book too. It was my first real writing attempt, and being a novice at it, I knew that I wasn't going to do it well or do it right necessarily. So he was there so I could throw ideas at him, give him script, and say like, "What's wrong with this?" or "Does it make sense?" And he gave me all kinds of great feedback for it.
Yeah, so there was a little bit of. I was familiar with it, of course, but that number one was really all Dan, and that it was clear that he wanted to make it his own. Whereas this one, he approached me about it, and I was interested. Of course, we've known each other for a while too, so we kind of know each other's creative sensibilities. But there were there were funny times where we would push back a little bit on material and. It was one of those that never was arguing about it. It wasn't like the Beatles going ready to strangle each other, but it was kind of like, well, okay, maybe you just want to do this and okay, fine. And I think Worms Crawl Out, I don't know if Dan probably had 80% of it done to start. I contributed either 20% or negative 20% and just made it worse. That's perhaps up for grabs. I'm not really sure if my presence was accretive or not, but I think it's a good question, Andrew, because those kind of things, they could either make or break a book with the creative discourse. But I think I knew what he was going for. I definitely knew what he was going for on number one, and then we kind of solved some of the storytelling elements, or I don't know. I don't want to even call them plot holes. There was one weekend in particular where we just sat there for, Dan, what was it? It felt like it was like 8 hours just working through every single thing, like almost like whiteboarding it out. Like, okay, if this happens, then this, then this. But wait, why are they over here? Start over. That's what you have to do, right? When it's two people, when it's not just one person controlling everything,
Because it's interesting because I've spoken to writing teams and I've spoken to people who, and even, sometimes an artist and a writer just work so well together and they're just banging something out. And then sometimes people don't work well together. And there are stories at Marvel and there are stories at DC where an artist and a writer were just not working and the book failed. And so it's so interesting because when you do have a writing team and an art team that works well together, it changes the dynamic of a book and it makes something better. Yeah. And so it's such a fascinating concept. And even business, there's plenty of people who have really good business partners and it's just that they make a lot of money together. And it's so interesting partnerships, I feel, at this stage in the game because they either work or they don't. And there's nothing in between. So I just find the whole thing fascinating.
It's a fine line, right, between being insistent on quality. You can't just kind of roll over like one or the other and say, okay, fine, yeah, and everything's going great. If there's no creative discourse, then that's not good. But if you're overly stubborn about it, or you're just at loggerheads, then yeah, if you don't have the same vision, then that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, and Matt's great. He has a lot of really fantastic ideas and creativity, which he contributed to the book, and it's I think it absolutely made it better. He's also a real like novelist. He's a writer. and I don't think people appreciate enough what that means. It's not just coming up with ideas for a story and saying, I'm just going to type some things into like my word processing software or whatever and just come up with, call myself a writer. Like he writes like as a skill and as a creative endeavor. So he knows all the only way I can equate it to is like if I'm drawing, I know what pencil I'm supposed to use, like what hard lead I'm supposed to use, or what the different kind of inks do, right? There's a very specific technical expertise to it. So Matt is like that technical expertise on writing. Like he actually writes and he just doesn't come up with ideas and bang it out on paper like a lot of people do.
Let's talk about that, because there is a position, and I'm going to say something and I may or may not get flack for it, but a lot of people that I speak to in comics feel that comic writers are not treated like a writer, and that that a comic writer is not the same as a novelist, as a journalist, as a biographer, somebody who does that, ad copy is not treated as the same as a novelist. And I think it's really, really interesting when you have a novelist coming into comics, or somebody who by trade is a writer then comes into comics, they are treated differently. And there's a bunch of skills when you are an experienced, writer that you have that does change a dynamic where there are writers and then there are storytellers. And there's a massive difference between those two things.
Mm-hmm.
And so what is that like? Because that also changes the dynamic of a book in a certain way when somebody is a skilled writer and then they're teaming up with a storyteller. You hope, doesn't always work, but you hope that those two skills bring the book up to another level.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, I guess another.
This is the controversial one, all right? This is the gotcha question.
But, I guess another analogy I'll say is like we all live in houses, right? On the outside, the house looks great. It's painted very well and it's put together well. But I don't know that people appreciate the bones that go in behind the walls of the house that really make it strong and make it great. And that's what I think a good writer can do, is really put those bones in your story to make it great. There's a lot of, just like anything, there's a lot of stories out there, a lot of comic books, great art, stories. Okay. Maybe we just get it because the art looks nice and we suffer through the story in some regards. But when you can really put together a great story, within, a certain amount of tolerance, the art isn't as important. If the story hooks you and you stick with it, then, that's really the entertaining part. So like I said, I'm so glad that Matt decided to come on this journey with me and put those bones in my story.
I think, the only way I can think of this too is you have to almost visualize it like a graph in terms of like skill level. Like, just say arbitrary number, like 0 to 100 or whatever. The curve to become a good writer is so much steeper and longer. You can't just pick up a pencil and start drawing. Like Dan said, the technical stuff comes later, like knowing the correct pencil, the right perspective, all the things that go into being a good artist. So you need more hours of practice, right? Whereas being a writer, like you can get to 80 or 90, like by the time you're done with like high school, like everyone can read and write. So that level of expertise is more towards the end, to be like the Alan Moore or, the Grant Morrison, that kind of thing. That are those are the writers in that last 0.001% who really earn their comic book writing. Was that? I'm sorry.
I got to start asking you controversial questions.
Yeah, right. Then we'll just go on forever pontificating, right?
So this is a controversial question, and you just got my brain spinning, and I'm curious, how do you rank Stephen King?
Some people bag on him so much. I'll never forget this. I was in college, and there was pardon, this is going to be a quick digression, but storytelling, right? There was a student there, and universities, they're going to teach you the Joyces and the classics and all of that kind of stuff, and that's important. But he was talking down about Stephen King, like as if Stephen King kicked his dog. He's like, his literal words were, "No one's going to remember Stephen King 50 years from now." He's, and it was like, like a personal vendetta. And I just remember sitting there thinking to myself, I don't want to be like that. Like just because Stephen King entertains a lot of people doesn't mean it's bad. That's a unique skill set unto itself. Does he perhaps need an editor, or did he, especially in the old days with the 1,000-page tomes? Maybe,
This is how I view, and I view Neil Gaiman the same way, is I don't think Neil Gaiman and Stephen King are the greatest writers in the world. Not by a long shot. I think they're amazing storytellers. And I think there's a difference between a storyteller and a writer. And I think Bukowski is an amazing writer. Charles Bukowski, right. I think John Fontaine is an amazing writer in a lot of ways. And if you ever read Post Office or Factorium, the way those books are written are so intellectual and they're so brilliant. I think Carl, a guy who did Razor Girl, great writer, great structurist, for lack of a better word. I think Stephen King is an amazing storyteller, one of the best in the world. I think Neil Gaiman is one of the best storytellers in the world. Do I think that there are people who could write circles around both of those guys? Absolutely, hands down with ease. But doesn't mean that they're better storytellers.
Right.
Because writing is sometimes a technical skill, and then there's storytelling, which is a whole different skill. And that's why I asked the question, because I think it's so interesting when we talk about writing and putting bone structure in and understanding. And this is what sometimes comic companies do, is that somebody is a storyteller and then they hire a scripter, because the scripter is the technical writer and the storyteller came with the concept and wrote out the guidelines for that script. Yeah. And so I just think it's so interesting, this whole discussion, because it's very rare that somebody is a technical writer and is a writer by trade teaming up with somebody who's writing a comic book, and then you have something out there. And that's what makes this fascinating.
Smash.
Constellations coming together. Yeah.
At least I think it's fascinating. I don't know if anybody else thinks it's fascinating.
I do. And I think the one thing I would add, and then Dan, I feel like, it comes down to expectation too. Like, you don't read a Stephen King novel the same way you would read a Samuel Beckett, or, there's different intellectual exercises there, just, and to think that they have to be on the same level playing field. That's like saying, oh, I don't like Game of Thrones because I like the Super Bowl. It's like, well, wait, they're completely different affairs, I don't know.
No, it's a good analogy.
But I think that's like, with Dan and I, like, he discounts his writing, but he's always been doing the writing. I remember this story of, and I'm gonna butcher it up, but I have been reading it recently about Stan Lee and Steve Ditko at sort of odds, and they were doing it the Marvel way, right? I'm going to gloss over that and assume everybody here, and watching would know that what that entails, but that basically the story didn't make sense because Stan Lee didn't fill in the correct details in his script, and Spider-Man solved the criminals, then basically let him go, and then caught him again by the end of the same comic. And even like a 6-year-old is going to be like, well, wait, why did he let him go here? He was basically, it was like a feedback loop where he needed information about a gang. So he caught the gang to get information on them and then caught them again by the end. I wish I could find it quick. I would send out the link. But
The old days of comics when writing was super easy.
Right.
Everybody bought it anyway.
Wow, Spider-Man, you're really making this harder on yourself. Catch and release times too.
Anybody can do it once. It's if you can do it twice.
That's right. Yes. Iron Fist. Yeah, he'll catch him once and think he's hot shit, but now.
So many things, but I do actually want to dive into this story a little bit because it's super interesting, this whole story, and obviously we're deep diving into stuff, and this is the kind of stuff that's fascinating. Obviously, if you read the first one, this one is a much deeper dive in, and we really learn a lot about Delane as a character and what she's been through, and even just her failures and all that stuff. And you take a real axe into her in a lot of ways and kind of reveal her and open her up metaphorically.
Yeah.
I want to say this is the type of book that you could technically open somebody up in physically. So what was this like doing that? Because you have this character that was in the first book and Worms Crawling In, and now you have this character again, and we're obviously taking a snapshot and deep diving into her, and we're kind of dealing with her failures, her accomplishments, and everything that sort of has transpired, and we're turning it up to an 11 in a lot of ways. And what is that like? Because it's so interesting what you've done, because this is a whole new exploration of her in so many ways. And so what is that like? Because it's got to be fun, but it's also got to be kind of terrifying to some degree as well when you're really furthering developing a character outward.
Yeah, and with the first book as well, I think most of the fun is in that character development. I mean, that's why people like and read books. They read the characters and they identify with them, or they sympathize with them at some point, at some level. And that's what kind of carries you along, because you're interested in finding out this person's story, or finding out what motivates them, or why they are the way they are. I mean, if you think about it in levels, like the surface level is what we see going on, right? She goes on this journey to go find a friend who is trapped in the underworld. And so she goes through all these different levels of the underworld to go find Marco. And then, of course, there's the other characters. But the underlying kind of story is all of that emotional and all that other stuff that's been happening and that happens. The searching of the soul and all that stuff to find out who you are, and understanding the faults of yourself and then trying to fix those. That's kind of really what the story, the trend of it is. So, I mean, usually when I come up with ideas and I do the storytelling, that's kind of like the vein of it that keeps me, that kind of directs the story, right? Is just, what is the character going through, and how do they resolve themselves at the end? And then all the other kind of stuff gets layered in, and it resolves itself also. But I think that's kind of the fun part of creating, and hopefully the fun part for people to read as well.
And like I would add too, Dan, like the notion of redemption, right? That it's not an easy thing. There is, in the real world, it's always going to be a little complicated. And I said it earlier, but I think one of the great things about both of your books is that there's not the bow on top, that people can kind of read into it what they want, Yeah,
let's actually talk about that, because your books aren't happy.
What do you mean?
That's a low blow.
I mean, it's not
He's got a point, though.
I didn't say it wasn't entertaining. See, I don't have a problem with unhappy stories. I like unhappy stories. I like stories where nobody's happy at the end. I want to be entertained. There's a difference between those two things. If I am not entertained and there's a happy ending, we have a problem. If I'm not entertained and it's a sad ending, we have a problem. If I'm entertained and it's a miserable ending and everybody dies, well, I was entertained for at least a whole issue or 87 pages or 150 pages, whatever it was, or a half an hour, then I really can't complain. If I'm content with it, great. If if it was a miserable ending, I hated, but I was entertained for the ride, well, I could say that was a shitty ending, but hey, you gave me 7 hours of entertainment. So can I really be upset? Like, so, but that's the thing that's interesting about your book is that this is a book that deals with consequences. There are choices being made, and a bunch of choices have been made with her, and she's trying to make some of them right. She's trying to, I guess, get peace for herself and for others, and she's willing to go through hell to get it. And what is that like to have a character whose morale changes and gets a backbone and wants to, I guess, make that major shift in who she is and what she stands for? And there is consequences because it's kind of her fault that she has to go and do this to some degree.
Yeah. And I think that's one of those things, maybe just me, that people identify with. We've all made choices in our lives, good and bad. And for those bad choices that we've made, how motivated are we to go out and fix it, to kind of shed ourselves of any of that guilt and stuff like that. So that's where, stories like this, I hope are entertaining, that it goes places where maybe we as real humans probably wouldn't go to those lengths to do something. So it kind of gives you that fantasy of, I wish I could do that too.
And then even to go further into that, I mean, it's kind of very interesting too, because I obviously read it and you sent me a copy, and I viewed it more as an allegory than anything else. And obviously you were facing, or she's facing, her inner demons. And I think we've all faced that to some degree, or we all sometimes have to. And again, you make a choice and then, well, you got to deal with it. And maybe you made the wrong choice in certain ways. And now you have to go and fix that. And then there's a bunch of consequences. And then sometimes people join you. And obviously she's got some friends who are joining her on this quest too, which is a whole different biblical discussion, could be read into it, where you have true believers in that sense. And so what is that like too, to even have that and have those characters involved in this too? Because I think it's so fascinating, because that raises questions, and a lot can be read into it if you want to dive deep down into it, or you could look at it just on a surface level. And that's what's so interesting about this whole project in this book, is a lot of interpretation can be presented in it.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna chicken out on that and kick it over to Matt, because he really focused on the other characters that in that part of the story.
Well, I think too, like, so there's the other characters. There's the journey from front to back, and I'm gonna remind that this happens in the middle, as Dan said. It's not a prequel. It's a quell. It's not a prequel or it's right.
It's just a quell.
Yeah. So, but from the page one of Crawl In versus the last page of Crawl Out, you see Delane herself go on this emotional journey. Like, some of her first words are, pretty dark. Like, she's looking at everything around her through this very negative lens, and it's not like she doesn't come to some point where, oh my God, everything's great and everything's rosy, rainbows, but she sort of understands, and this is my interpretation of her, everyone will have their own, but that she's gone through hell to understand that there's sort of reasons for this. And then, Marco will have his own reasons, and everyone will. I think I'm not sure how many spoilers to give out, so it's going to be a little hard to talk about kind of the side characters.
So let's actually talk about it. I'm going to try to avoid it, in which that I feel that there is room to breathe in this book. And so I've done a bunch of interviews where every interview is different, where sometimes somebody needs more room to breathe in an interview, and you ease up and you give them, air. And then sometimes you got to pack it in tight because your guest isn't being cooperative. And I've had both interviews, and I've pulled teeth.
Sure.
I've had horrible interviews where I've had to pull teeth and I've had to carry. And I've had interviews where I've legitimately spoken for 20% of the interview. and they were great. And then I've been in interviews where it was just back and forth, perfect, no interruptions, no anything. And that's a weird thing, but that rarely happens. So I feel with this that there is room to breathe, and that there's ability for interpretations, and that obviously she goes through things that are relatable, and that she gets to a place where things aren't perfect, but they're okay. They're okay, in which
Mhm.
that I'm gonna live another day and it's not gonna be as bad. Might be a good way how I view it. And so what is that like to really allow though for interpretations to be involved in this book for people, and that you could just say, hey, it's just a girl's quest on from start to finish, trying to help somebody pass over into the next phase of their life and then continue on with her life. And she's roped into it, or there's a reason why she's involved.
Well, but that's the strength of what Dan made here, is that I would argue too that it's not just her quest. Like a good any of the good stories, like we mentioned Star Wars earlier, that it's just like a perfect, kind of I believe we did kind of comparison sometimes for these kind of things. But it's not just Luke, from and only that. It's, you see how Han changes, you see how Leia changes. Everybody has their starting point and goes through their journey. And Delane's friends go through the same thing. So I don't want to spoil it, but that's where, like, we now have the growth of all these characters. And, in terms of, I have no idea if Dan is anticipating a third or not, but there's still room for one of those characters and for Marco himself. He left it very wide open on some of those fronts.
Yeah, actually, one of the constructive criticisms that I got of the first one was that people did want to know more about and see more growth from Jordan and Parker, Delane's two companions in the books. So, like I mentioned, Matt did a really great job of kind of taking that and running with it, building their characters out more and really refining them to be more interesting people, and not just like a backup person who shows up in the background in Delane's story. So I think that's one of the strengths of this book over the first one, is that it really kind of builds out those characters more to a point where, like I said before, hopefully people can relate to them more and enjoy them as their own characters.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And then obviously, I mean, I don't even know how to describe it, because it's in the middle and it's an expansion. It's like D2 and D5 and all that stuff. It's like a Dungeons and Dragons expansion pack right there. But I digress. But what is this even like from even just like a monetary level though as well? Because you're getting to play in the world, you're getting to continue to expand the series, go further into it, and give people more information and more story and more, I guess, connection to this world. Because that's something that, people, when they like something, they're like, hey, I like this book, but I want more of it. Maybe monetary isn't the right word, but maybe more content, maybe an expansion. I don't know exactly how to describe it off the top of my head, but what is that like? Because I think it's a very interesting thing right now. So I think a lot of creators don't know how to do that, where they strike gold with the world, but they don't know how to make exits and get back into the world and get out of their world. And I think it's a real skill in a lot of ways.
Well, that's one of the fun things about creating, writing, storytelling, for me at least, is not putting tight bows on everything. Matt, you were talking about it earlier. Not everything needs to be fully explained or have a resolution to it. And that gives you the opportunity to kind of build those extra stories and extra worlds off on, sequels, prequels, quills, all those things. And,
Do you feel that, because this is my problem with a lot of people in comics right now, is that, great, you write 6 issues, but you've written one entry point and one exit point, and that's it. And then they try to come back into the story. The story does really good. A publisher wants to pick it up, and then they said, oh, I'm only writing a one shot. And then you come back in, and then it doesn't work. Or the second one you did, it's not great. And then the third one you did, it's not great. And then it fails. And because you didn't know how to write a point to connect it. And I think it's a real problem in comics, especially when you hit gold and you strike gold. And I think a lot of creators suck at that, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
And to some degree, I think it's kind of pushed by the industry. Am I right? Like that's the formula for comic books these days is have a 5 or 6 issue arc, and everything has to kind of be in a box and tied up because some other writer or somebody else is going to take, the writing after that. So you kind of have to have everything together, and then they want to squish it into a trade and sell that for extra money. So it's kind of the way of the industry right now to kind of pack it all in there without much room for expansion.
And I would add too, like, comics through probably, I was going to say most of their history, maybe half of their history at this point, were serials that just went from week to week. It was only, at that certain point where it became the trade paperback, where it was all like the 6-issue runs and where it was very clearly, and those were revolutionary at the time. And they were important, and I would argue they probably made the comic industry better in terms of the storytelling, where you would have these episodic events as opposed to who is the Hulk fighting this week kind of stuff, right? Now you could argue whether that killed the comic industry because it was no longer as much for kids and all of that, the summer blockbuster mess every year. But I think to both of your points is writers have to learn to not only work in that box because something works and you go and revisit it again. If you write it the same exact way, it's just not going to happen. You have to figure out like a new angle or, in Dan's case, a quell, something else that carried the same motif, same themes, same everything, but told a completely different story. I'm not sure if that makes sense.
No, it does. It does. I mean, my take, and this is how I view it, is that I just think that the skill isn't there for a lot of writers.
Okay, just that simple.
I think a lot of people do not know how to get in and out of things and how to say, cool, let me leave this open and let me just create an opportunity that in issue 3 that doesn't affect the story, but allows me to spin off 2 issues of this weird character, how he got to this town, and then see where that goes. And I think that a lot of writers sometimes don't even know how to put in 2 or 3 panels to spin something off. And, especially, and I don't think it's that hard to fill 2 or 3 panels in and understand that, hey, this might go nowhere and it might be brushed off. But if all of a sudden, a year or 2 from now, I want to have a short one shot of this character, I could explain how they got to this town and got drunk in this bar. And then there's somebody in my head who should do that, and she's not doing it. And I'm like, I'm missing an opportunity here where this is perfect, where it's going to legitimately take you 4 lines and 2 panels to have that option. And that's why I say I don't think the skill's there. And I think very few writers are able to do that. I think one of the only ones I could think of to the top of my head is Pat Chan does that really well, where Pat does things and sneaks in things to be able to spin off things out of Destiny New York and spin things into it. And I think it's a real skill. But I know a lot of people who I feel have missed opportunities in their books. And I'm like, this is part of the problem. And
Yeah.
And I don't even know if it's a writing problem as much as it's a creativity problem.
Well, I would blame Chris Claremont for that one because he overdid that. So now everyone's afraid of. There were years of storylines that we just never got back to that one. So you're right. Like you just have to do it just with a little bit of discipline, right?
Yeah, and I think those opportunities are out there for almost everybody. You just have to kind of recognize those moments, and Andrew, like you said, kind of seize on it. If there was a scene where your hero gets in a fight in a bar, there's people in the bar. You can creatively work something in there where now you take the story of this guy who got his table flipped over on him and he's all pissed off and he's in the bar and he walks out of the bar. Now you have this whole other arc that you can do from this guy who got knocked over in a bar by the hero.
Or how did he get to the bar?
How did he get there?
In the same universe, and maybe he went west and your hero came east, and now you have a whole concept where it's great. You have one issue and maybe people will gravitate towards this character. And, or, you know what it is? Maybe you have a gang in the bar and you have, you know, the gang story of how they got there for 2 issues. And great, they don't proceed further out from that story, but now you have another bunch of content in it. And I don't know, maybe it's a monetary problem. I don't know, because in Kickstarter land, you know, in indie comics, it's really hard to take those decisions and do that because it's expensive to do it. But at the same time, I don't think it's hard to put the option in. Versus doing it versus an option is different, because I like to put as many options into my playbook as humanly possible.
Yeah, and you might not ever use it, but it's there if the audience demands more content and they like what you have that door to walk through if you need to.
And I just view it, and maybe it's easier for me to say because I'm not paying the bills. I don't know. On the second it's my money, I understand that it's my money, and I understand that if you're doing this book, I really can't tell you to do an option because I'm not paying for your book to be made. But if I was paying for your book and I wanted it in there, that'd be a different story. So I get that from my perspective on that. But at the same time, I'm like, I don't think it'd be that hard to put those little tidbits in there and then use them or not. But
it's like investing from a creative standpoint. Like you take a chance on a product. You say, I think this product is going to be awesome and it's going to sell, so I'm going to get that, and then I'm going to sell it for double or triple the price. So it's kind of the creative version of that, right? I'm looking at my story and I'm saying, if it takes me half a page to kind of build this branch off here, then that's a little investment that I put in now that might pay off big later.
I don't know. Maybe I think differently than everybody else. And
and to carry that analogy is like, just because. So you know what I'm sitting here thinking about, and it's if you guys watched Westworld or not, I fell in love with the first season. I loved it so much. We didn't get into it, but then they made further seasons, and the arch problem that they did was they kept the theme. And the motif, but then they repeated the story, and all it did was kind of take away from the first one, because it became more and more of a mind bender to the point that you kind of lose track of what people are doing. And I think one of the keys that you guys are kind of talking about as well, that we're talking about overall, you leave these escape hatches with, like, for example, the guy in the bar, but the next project, you want the theme and the motifs and some of that to be there, but you don't want to tell the same story. If you're literally telling the same story again, then it just kind of gets old, right? Like,
no, I agree. I mean, Pat Chan does this with Gangster Ass Barista. It's in the same world as Destiny New York. It is nothing like Destiny New York. Mm-hmm. There's the rules of the world, events that have happened in the world are still there. So if a comet hit Earth, the comet hit Earth, right? Everybody understands that a city's gone. So your character might escape from the city, but beyond that, if the world's fucked up, the world's fucked up. But the gangster ass barista is dealing with his shit, and Logan is dealing with her shit in Destiny, New York, and they're in the same world, and they could cross each other, but they don't have the same story, but they have the same world. And I think that's what people mess up on. So like the guy in the bar, if you were to do 4 issues of how he got to the bar, maybe he had a grand old time and was partying all the way to the bar, and your hero had a miserable time getting to the bar. And now we have same world, and I just think and now the rules are similar. I view this very much like Avatar: The Last Airbender, where Avatar: The Last Airbender and Korra, the rules of bending and the rules of the world are relatively the same, but they're very different stories. But there's familiarity in both those stories, where I know that a waterbender is not going to be a firebender. And I know that there is a bunch of stuff that's happened, and I'm enough familiarity, but still different. That's just how I view it. But I agree.
So you're hitting close to home, and I can't resist a plug here, because I know it's about worms crawling. But so in my novels is one of the key points is Matt, the main character of the novels, so they're all very meta, is he's writing his own novel, and within each novel, there are 6 stories of what he wrote about the end of the world, and all of these characters intersect and such. So that's the tonality is exactly what's going on there. So it hits close to home. I know what you mean about, like, so some can be light, some of those stories, some could be really dark, or the different what have yous, everything about it, but they all have this central core of this is the end of the world.
No, I found it interesting. Yeah. I mean, this whole thing, and I'm not a writer. I tried. I didn't get too far. I am more of a technical writer than anything else, where I enjoy writing about real events, and I enjoy writing articles about real people, and I enjoy doing critical articles. I used to write a lot for my website, and I used to just like to critique anime, extensively critique anime, and be like, here's what's good with it, here's what's bad with it, and should you watch it, and here's why. And I thoroughly enjoy doing that. Same thing with comics, giving real reviews, not like saying it was a good book, guys, and the art was fantastic. Like, no, this book covers Winston Churchill from when he was 12 years old and how his father hated him, dictating him and giving you a visual history of what his life looked like, the hardships and this and that, and actually critiquing a book and saying it also has problems. I enjoy that, but I'm not a creative writer.
That's one of my frustrations when somebody's recommending a show and all they do is say, it's so great, over and over. Like, that doesn't help me. Compare it to something for me, and then we'll get somewhere, right?
I'll sell a show right now, 91 days. It's 13 episodes. No, it's 15 episodes, and you need a 7.5 in it because there's no wasted space. With every single episode in that show, every second is important in that show. From start to finish, every second is important about revenge, and every second is accumulating to the ultimate revenge of the show. And it is brilliant, and there is no wasted motion. It is a perfect show, and it is the only perfect show I've ever seen, and it will blow your mind away because it is the quintessential of what perfection of a show looks like.
Well, I think that's one of the themes, right? Is a show that rewards you for paying attention. Like that's always my thing, that with the dead space, or where they have false leads or anything like that. It could be a murder mystery, it could be whatever, like up to Game of Thrones, down to whatever. I think that's with Worms Crawl In and Out, is it's not just literally the story that's going on, it's all this stuff in the background. Dan's got stuff I don't even know about, and he'll point out afterwards, like, oh crap, how did I miss that? Kind of thing.
Because I think this is where it gets really interesting, is that even all the details and everything from I like when books have details that you don't know what they're in there, and they sneak stuff in and Easter eggs in, and I think it's very, very, very cool when books do that and when they set things up, especially on the indies, where if you're doing 6 issues and you sneak stuff into issue 1 that becomes relevant later on in issue 5, or if you sneak something into a series and you're part of a company that's doing 7 series and they all are supposed to interconnect at some point, and that something in book X connects to book Y 6 issues down in book Y, I like that too, because I think it's really cool when you interconnect things and you make sure that they're all linking up.
Yeah, that's part of that, what I was mentioning before, I think, about just the mechanics of writing, having the skill of knowing how to plan those things out and where to place them where they make sense. Instead of just writing just a kind of in a linear way and just flowing like that, you have to know what nuggets you're going to put in there, and then you have to know where to place them in the story well, so that everything kind of, so people can find it, those Easter eggs.
Do you feel though that people try to do that and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't? Because I've read books where people try to write that way, try to write in a circular way, and that they might have been better off writing linear, because I don't think there's anything wrong with writing a comic that starts off small and escalates to a big explosion ending. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If that's the book you want to write, but if you're going to write circular, or you're going to write cryptics in there, or hidden messages, or plant things, I mean, you really got to plan that out, and you got to build a Bible for it in a lot of ways. Not the Bible, a Bible. And so what is that? Because I think that's a big problem, because I've read plenty of comics that have had a great concept and have had horrible execution because the writer had no fucking idea how to plant those things in there and present them correctly and say, cool, I'm going to plant this in issue 1, put this thing in issue 3, put this in issue 5, put this in issue 6 and 7. Don't put anything in issue 8, and then put 4 things in issue 9, and then connect issue 1, 6, and 7 in issue 10, and then connect 9 and 4 and 5 in issue 11, and then at issue 12 where it ends, everything will be sort of leading up to that point. Like, I think a bunch of people don't know how to do that.
Well, this is one of the amazing things about Matt, is that I've seen the notebooks and the charts and the Excel documents he creates for his novels, and how he organizes every single moment and how it connects with the other moments. It's impressive. It's something I really struggle to do. He's got spreadsheets.
So that's half of it. Those are the chapters. Oh man! Don't tell me I've lost the other one. Anyway,
so I agree with you, Andrew.
That's half the book. Here are all the chapters. Here's what's going on. Here's a description to myself. The things I don't want to forget. But hey, it works. That way you don't forget those things when you drop in the Easter egg. And you wrote it like a year ago. Like, oh right, I need to put that. I need to resolve that.
Yep. So like in 3 years from now, when the fans are asking you about things, you're like, oh yeah, hold on. Let me check my notes.
And Andrew, to your point too, like I think it's one of those where the notion of over-promising. If you're some shows I can watch, and the notion of Chekhov's gun, right? Where if a gun comes into it in Act 1, then it has to be used by Act 3. Those kind of things. Too many times there's this stuff going on in the background, and when it doesn't get resolved, you feel cheated because it felt like they didn't know what they were doing. I think one of the easiest examples, I feel like I brought this up a couple times already, but like Game of Thrones, the way that ended, and sorry, spoilers, if anybody, but it rewarded you for paying attention all through the first 6 seasons or whatever it was, where, if somebody dropped something in the background, well, that's there on purpose. The director did that on purpose, so it's going to come up later. But by the end, they had so much stuff, and it was so rushed. I don't know that anybody's currently going to know what happened behind the scenes. Money was involved, obviously, actors getting older, some combination thereof. And it was all rushed. And there's entire storylines that just never came back. And I think that resulted in some of the biggest anger that I can remember recently, before that feeling of being overpromised and underdelivered, right?
Yeah, and like you said, the importance of having those making those proper connections. If you start something in the beginning, it has to fit somewhere at the end, and it has to fit well.
Right.
I mean, Lost was rough on that too.
That's
where
right.
After a while, Lost season 1 was great. Lost season 2 was great too. That was fantastic. And then when you got into season 3, season 4, it was bad. And then season 5 was a disaster.
Off the rails, right?
Because they ran out of ideas. And it was just like, are they dead? Are they alive? Are they all going to be together? Are they in purgatory? Are they all moving on? Like, what's going on here? And it was a messed up ending to Lost, because I think they ran out of ideas, and I think they had all these stories in there and they didn't know how to get in and out of them, and I think that's what it came down to.
Battlestar Galactica, same way. I don't know if you remember that one, but yeah, same thing. It had all of this mythology attached, and then they just kind of forgot it at the end.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen pieces of Battlestar Galactica, but it's probably a little bit before my time.
Right.
So, to be clear, this is the show on Sci-Fi, not the original show.
Oh yeah, the It was like the mid aughts there. So yeah.
Yeah.
I don't even know that one either. I mean,
Okay.
I'm way out. I'm way out on this one.
Oh.
I wish I could know.
Trust me. Yeah.
I know Game of Thrones. I know Lost. I know Sense8. That was great. That was great on Netflix. But that thing. They ended it the best they could with what they had. That was a painful show to have gone. They could have gone on for another 2 seasons with ease. But I digress. It was better though than Jupiter's Legacy because that thing was painful.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that.
It's not worth the watch. So let's
okay, all right, good. Yeah, everybody's giving recommendations. Okay, check one off. All right, good.
You can cross that one off. You can just say, I'm good. Thank you very much, everybody. But I do want to actually talk more on the business side of things with this book because it is a quell. For business purposes, I'm going to call it a sequel for the sense that it is the second book that you've produced in this world and in this series or this universe, or I don't know how to properly describe, but it is book 2, for lack of a better word. And obviously people who like the first one, and they probably, a good chunk of them want more content, which means that you're going to sell it. And also, if you go to a con or you sell one of these books, somebody's going to want the other. And so on a business standpoint, I mean, this keeps this series fresh in a lot of ways, and it interjects new blood into it. And so what is that like? Because I think that's something that when you have an issue 2 of a book out there, or you have a volume 2, or you have a volume 3, you're bringing new blood into it. You're bringing new attention to it. You're continuing it on, and you're reminding people, hey, this series is still active. And so what is that like? Because I think it is important that it's great that you do a one-shot, but I think a one-shot only has so much life in it. And when you bring out a second issue or a sequel or a quell or a side story, I don't know exactly how we should describe this, but you say, hey, this is still relevant, and here's a new bunch of content that goes along with it. So what is that like? Because I think it does.
Yeah. It's so I guess that's one of the surprises I've had so far with this current campaign for Worms Crawl Out. One of the tiers in it is you can get both books, Worms Crawl In and Worms Crawl Out. I wasn't expecting a whole lot of responses to that, but it's probably been like half the pledges that I have are getting both. So some people, of course, got the next book. In just a single book because they already have the first one. But there's also a lot of people who want both. So I have to now have a stock of both. It's not just the people who are, the continuing customers, but it's also these people who somehow, are interested in the other ones.
Like, what is that like? Because it's interesting when you put out an issue 2 or a volume 2 where, I hate to say this, but people miss a lot of content. In our society, there's a lot of content. There's no way in hell that I can discover things. There's things that I'm discovering from 5 years ago, and I'm like, holy shit, this is great. How did I miss this? And I'm like pissed off because I missed it. And I'm now reading it. I'm like, man, this is great. Like, where the fuck have I been? And how come this was never across my desk? And I then have to stop and say, wait a second. It's because I was reading all this other good stuff too that I just missed it. Like, so what is that like that people are discovering it? Because I think what is Worms Crawl In, what is that, like 3 years old now?
Yes. Yep.
So, I mean, it's not ultra old, but even still, I mean, we're in a weird time, right? I guess is the only way I could present it. So what is that like that now people are discovering that thing from 3 years ago, and they're discovering the new thing, and they want all of it, and they obviously missed it.
To your point, it's like a sea of content out there now, an ocean. There's just so much stuff out there, and there's not. My feelings, at least, there's not as many. I hate this term, gatekeeper ways for people to know what good content is. There's just there's just so much out there. So it's really easy to miss something. But for the fans, at least, now they have the opportunity to jump into something new, even if it's older. So personally, I like the concept of graphic novels. They stand alone and they are timeless. I don't have to worry so much about, issue 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 10, 20 issues and have all those. The book is good now as it was 3 years ago, as it will be 5 years from now. On one sense, from a business side, like you said, pushing the new book out there, making sure I have stock that I can give out. Now I have to go back and rethink the first one. It's in a way, it's kind of like a collector's item, I guess. I only printed 200 copies of it. So everybody who got one has the first edition. And if I am going to make more and go to cons and things like that, now I have to print a second edition. And the people who got the first edition are going to luck out, because if other people want those first editions, they're going to have to pay for them because there's only 200.
And like a jerk, mine's not in near mint anymore. I actually read it back and forth too many times, so it's fine at best. Yeah,
Go find mine too now. So eBay, here we go.
Yeah. So I have to figure out what I want to do with this second book now. The Kickstarter is, of course, going on right now. When the Kickstarter ends, I have to decide how many first printings I make of that book, of course, to fulfill the Kickstarter, but then to keep on hand for comic shops and things like that, and for me to sell on my own shop. I don't know. Maybe I'll do the same thing, and I'll just limit it, cap it at like 200, and then whoever gets the 200, they get the best collector's items.
So let's actually talk about this, because there's a lot of stuff to talk about, because this is the part that I like talking about. Is I love talking shop, I love talking business. And so obviously, I mean, I'm backing a lot more Kickstarters, but I'm in a weird position now where I tend to buy a lot of wholesale now, and I've started to negotiate that. I have about 3 or 4 deals that are somewhat up in the air that are being negotiated / being closed out for my eBay store. And I'm buying indie, but I don't want to buy any more directly on Kickstarter, because I like retail packages, but I really like dealing with owners and creators directly and negotiating what works for me in my store. And so I'm actually probably going to back less and less Kickstarters, but I'm going to be supporting more and more. I don't know if that makes any sense, but not on the Kickstarter per se. And so what is this like, though? Because the market has changed, where that's a change in my business practice. And how do you guys feel that the market has changed in Kickstarter and crowdfunding, and even where it's going? Because it has been in a weird place. And I know, and you know, plenty of people who are struggling heavily on Kickstarter. I mean, I know somebody right now who did well. They did 30,000 plus on Kickstarter, but they struggled to the very end. And it was painful to watch on a good product. I mean, you know who I'm talking about, right?
No. Wait, yes, probably, yes.
Yeah. He's a friend. He's a friend, but I don't want to put him on blast. But like anybody who knows anybody, but that book should not have struggled the way it did.
Yeah, it seems like at least the crowdfunding space is, and I'm not like a super expert on this. I don't do like 2 books a month on Kickstarter like some people do. But it seems like there's more general eyes on the space, and generally speaking, more money in the space, but that those eyes and that money is kind of spread out more.
Do you feel that it's spread out, or do you feel that it's more concentrated in certain areas and then the rest is dwindled out? Because
there's certain books.
Let's call who it is. Merc Mag draws attention, and they are very concentrated. Brian Polito draws attention. Pat Sham draws attention. But then you have somebody. I'm trying to think of somebody who Paul Gomez. I love Paul. Paul Gomez will fund, but he doesn't draw attention, and he's maybe in that more spread out area. I could say that about Paul, and I don't think Paul's going to get upset because Paul's a friend. So I mean, I'm just curious what you
Yeah,
guys.
and there's nothing wrong with that from his standpoint. It has, at least in my opinion, it has a lot to do with just like presence. Some people like Pat have a huge audience. They have like this built-in audience that they've grown over time, so they contribute and they put out a product that catches a lot of eyes. As soon as you see it on Kickstarter, you know, people gravitate to those things. So I think it's a combination of, like I mentioned before, that sea of content. There's just so much out there on Kickstarter, on Indiegogo, and all those other ones. You know, unless you have that already built-in audience, you know, it can be hard to get noticed.
It's also the built-in audience not built on Kickstarter. Because we look at somebody like Pat Chan, we look at Jamie Tyndall. Those guys did not build their audience on Kickstarter. And this is what everybody doesn't understand. We look
Polito,
at Eric July. He didn't build his audience in a comic. Andrew Tate didn't build his audience in a comic. They all built their audience outside, and they've all earned their audience. Don't think I'm not saying that, everybody, but they brought their audience and converted them into Kickstarter. And that's the difference. And I think that's a misconception in the industry, is that if you're building your audience on Kickstarter, it's a very different journey than if you have an audience from mainstream or from somewhere else and then you brought it into another platform. Well, it's kind of like if I built a YouTube channel and I had 100,000 people and then I went to Twitch, I brought my 100,000 subscribers from YouTube to Twitch. Then I have 100,000 subscribers on Twitch. I didn't build a Twitch audience. I converted an audience, and that's the difference.
And I would add, there's obvious macro differences too. Like Kickstarter got this shot of steroids, likely from the pandemic, when all of a sudden, you know, all of these eyes were moving there, and it's, you know, like throwing too much food into a pond. Some of these fish got very big, and if that food isn't going in anymore, well, now that you got the big fish floating around, what happens to the smaller ones, kind of thing, right?
Like, yeah, no, I agree. And then also, I mean, there's real questions about even these bigger fish to some degree too. Is
right, like as you just mentioned. Yeah.
Can they survive? And are they surviving? I mean, we look at some of these campaigns in the next 6 months or the next year. Are they really going to be doing 50,000, or are they going to slowly dwindle out? Because when food, you know, comes less and less, and you eat all your competition or you kill your competition, you know, all of a sudden what happens? I mean, and we've seen it with Pat, where Pat had a really crazy Kickstarter that he did over 100,000, but you know, he's still killing it, but he's not doing 100,000 again so easily. And so the question is, and I mean, if you do 70,000 on Kickstarter, I'm not saying that you failed. That's not a failure at all. But, you know, if the metric, in my opinion, was that we are on the upper trajectory, the next person should do 200,000, should be 300,000. And if we're going the opposite direction and it goes from 100,000 down to 80,000, down to 70,000, down to 60,000, there's nothing wrong with a $60,000 campaign, but that doesn't mean we're in a growth mode. That doesn't mean money's pouring in. That means that it was either a runaway campaign, it hit at the right time with no competition, it was something unique that people wanted, or there was a lot of money in the economy, and therefore backing the item was easier, and it was just everybody was just throwing fuel into the fire, and the fire was burning. And I don't know what it was. Yeah. That's.
I like the analogy you had about the fish in the pond, because yeah. So which way am I pointing?
Over here.
So I think the biggest campaign going right now, wasn't it Neil Gaiman's Omens, Good Omens? It's like over 2 million, and prior to that, the biggest one was Keanu Reeves with Berserker at like 1.5 million. So it's still bringing in more money and going up, but those big, and but here's the thing, is that there's more big fish coming in. I think those companies like Boom and Dynamite and all them are now getting much more comfortable with kickstarting their own stuff. Like they're like publishers and they're kickstarting stuff. So those big fish are coming in, and I'm wondering what happens to those smaller fish when those big fish really start to eat all that food.
I wonder what's also going to happen, because this is where I'm at, is that I'm exhausted from Kickstarter, to be honest. And I'm both a consumer and I run a business on eBay buying and selling comics. And so I have gone through expansion. I also am dealing with other things where, Comics Elite does Power Hour, and they don't run Power Hour for the most part on Kickstarter, but they run a Power Hour book every week or every other week. Mount Olympus has a bunch of content every single Friday.
Yeah.
And so I don't think anymore you're competing with Kickstarter books. I'll be honest, if I want Bad Girl art, I could go to Zenescope every month. I could go to Mount Olympus. I could do Power Hour, or I could go on Kickstarter. Or Son Kumanaki has something, and there's all these people who have Patreons with Bad Girl art and their covers. And so now Kickstarter is not the only place for me to buy product for either my personal collection or to flip or sell or to speculate on. And so now I think it's a very interesting thing. And I don't even know if these big fish are even they're going to make money, but I don't know if it's really going to move the needle one way or the other. Because at this point, I think there's so much competition outside of the market of Kickstarter and crowdfunding in general that I can go anywhere I want. And then I also am privileged where I can go to wholesale. I legitimately, if I wanted to, could just buy wholesale for my own personal collection if I really wanted to at this point. And so it's like, because I know enough people. So that's the other thing too, is that, and I think everybody technically, if they really wanted to and they wanted to spend enough money, if you wanted to spend $500 with somebody and you wanted to buy somebody's collection like Jim Noble or Tom Hutchinson, I'm pretty sure you could work out a deal directly with those people. So that's just how I see it. But
yeah, I mean, I was just talking on a show last night about I have a retailer tier on Worms Crawl Out. You can get 5 books for like $45. So kind of to what you were just saying, if you, not saying that you should, maybe you should, if you bought that five
kind of subliminal there.
Right, you buy the 5 books, keep one for yourself, sell the other ones, and then the ones that you sell would pay for the ones that you keep. So you essentially get a book for free.
I've done that where I bought 20 books and I sold 18 of them and I kept 2. And that, obviously I've done that. I've done where I've bought 10 books and I've sold 9 and it paid for all 10 books. And then I've done that where I bought 2 books and it paid for both. I just bought a card of Elisa Lehman. She's a soccer player and it's an autograph card. So I bought 2 for 120. I sold one of them for 120. I lost about $10 on the whole deal, but I bought the card for $10 versus $60. And so, and it's actually taxable. It's not a taxable event, oddly enough, because it's a loss. It's great. Continues to the hobby. It's Joe Biden's greatest accomplishment. Continues to the hobby. It's the greatest tax, Luke, that's ever been continued.
We could do some tax loss harvesting on there too, right? For the IRS.
Technically, I guess I could. I view it as a continuous to the hobby, so it's not a taxable event.
Right.
When I'm going to do my taxes. So because I sold it through my business on eBay, but it wasn't a business transaction, so it does not get count in my 1099K coming. And this is what a lot of people don't understand is that you have to get creative. So that's the whole point. But I digress.
We don't want to get the IRS coming after you here, bro.
No, I'm just saying people have to read tax laws. All I'm going to say.
Right. No,
and you should read every January 1st. You should read the IRS code, and you will be bored for a while, but it will help you in the long run. But that's not financial advice. That's just common sense.
Right. Right.
Yeah, there's a lot of things I should do that I don't.
I didn't say it was fun. The reason why nobody does it is that it's boring and it's not fun.
Yeah, you're not supposed to clean your shower with Drano either, but I still do. So
that's no.
No, that's a straight out. No,
you can't do that. But to your statement earlier about the business, though, it's important. We were just talking about the crowdfunding and stuff like that, but the diversification, right? Not just crowdfunding. You got to, I have my own shop too, where I sell books. I sold a bunch this week from people who saw me, advertising Worms Crawl Out. They're like, can I get the other one? And I'm like, go to my website. So selling it there, selling it, in all those kind of different places. I haven't yet, but going to cons. Ed Davis, Edward Davis. Yeah. All right. He goes to cons all the time, and he's building a great audience that way. So if you do like all those different things and just try to, like we were talking about stock markets earlier, you got to kind of diversify and have a lot of different streams going.
It's interesting where I run an eBay store, and every comic creator should have an eBay store. Every single one of you should have an eBay store, without a doubt. If you're selling floppies, you should put some books on eBay and see what happens. It's not, and the beautiful thing about eBay is that you pay 13% on the back end. So if it doesn't sell, it doesn't cost you a penny beyond putting it up with your time. And that's the thing, is that that's the trade-off, is that you're giving up 13%, but it didn't cost you anything to put it up. So there's no risk. If you have a Shopify store, it's going to cost you money to run your Shopify store at the start of it. And up front, you're going to pay less in percentage at the end, but it's still going to cost you money to keep it active. Same thing with a website. So there gets a point where, but if you even have a Shopify store, you should still have an eBay store, because guess what? There are people who will buy on eBay and they're just scrolling eBay. They're like, cool, what's this book? And then they see a particular cover or whatever you got, and there you go. You just made a sale because they're there. And
that's a good point. There's a lot of people who are comfortable with their way of buying things. There's people who, I'm one of them. I have a Kickstarter account because I create Kickstarters, but I don't have like an Indiegogo account or a Zoop account. And if somebody puts their book on Zoop, I probably won't get it because I don't want to make an account. I'm just lazy.
I have an Indiegogo account because I enjoy Mike Barron. I enjoy Hart Fisher. I've enjoyed Dashel. I can't think of Dashel's last name. He does Shotgun Samurai. Cool book, cool concept. It's a manga where it's a samurai who carries a shotgun instead of a sword. Cool concept. It's a fun book. It's fun. It's stupid. It's stupid. It's funny, and it's amazing. And I've said this, where your idea is the stupidest, most brilliant idea I ever heard. Because who doesn't want to read a book called Shotgun Samurai?
I've been seeing this book out called Cowboy Octopus or something like that, and and it makes me laugh every time I see it pop up.
My favorite book of all time that's ridiculously stupid is Axe Cop. It's a cowboy. He doesn't carry a gun; he carries an axe, and his like partner is like Avocado Man, and it's ridiculously stupid.
But that's written by his like 6-year-old brother, though, right? Wasn't that the time?
It's a 19-year-old brother, and this is the artist, and the 6-year-old is the writer. It's brilliant. It's awesome. It's so good. It's so good. And
you want stream of consciousness that puts the beats to shame, right?
Yeah. So there's buyers on eBay. There's buyers on probably Etsy. They're all over the place. So you kind of have to be everywhere.
And so that's my point, is that and this is what I don't understand, which is I've gotten into fights with people. I'm like, why don't you want to put your book on eBay? And someone's like, well, I don't want to be a flipper. And I'm like, but don't you want to sell your book? Like, don't you want to, if I am buying and flipping your book, then you should be there too. And you're not competing with me on eBay. I mean, there gets a point where you're not competing with me. I don't care if there's 100 books out there that I have on eBay, because there's room for everybody, and I'll match somebody's price. I do it all the time. And also what happens is that people buy from other people who they feel more comfortable. Like, I've had people spend more money and spend $5 more than somebody else because they want to buy from me. They've been buying from me for years, and they know that their book is going to arrive perfectly. And they don't mind spending more money because they know it's going to arrive perfectly. And they know it's insured. And they know that if there's a problem, I'm going to fix it.
And to your point, when you list on eBay, there's no cost to it. It's only at the point of purchase. So you just run the numbers and figure out what you need to sell it at. And the worst thing is it just sits out there for a month, right?
Or it sits up there and you just automatically renews.
Right, exactly.
So I have listings that I've listed almost a year ago that I haven't moved yet. They just renew every single month.
Yeah.
And I don't worry about it. And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh shoot, that thing sold. Where is it? Like, oh fuck.
Yeah, that's the only problem. Make sure you still have it. Right.
I mean, I know that I have it. It's just like, I'm like, okay, is it in this box, this box, this box? and like I have to go through 2 or 3 boxes, but like there you go. I mean, I have a centralized system, but I'm like, is it in box 1, 2, 3, or 6? And maybe it takes me 20 minutes to find it, and then I pack it up and I'm good to go and I'm happy. And I think that's what people don't understand. And I think too many people rely on Kickstarter. I think they view it as the be all end all when it should be a seed round.
Mm-hmm.
You've inspired me to open an eBay account.
Oh, you're gonna fail. No.
No, don't do it. It won't work. Yeah.
So to even go further into this, I mean, where do you guys foresee this whole thing going in Kickstarter? Because obviously with big names coming in, I think we touched upon it a little bit also, is that where do you see it all going? Because to me, I have become, I wouldn't say disenfranchised, but I'm burned out from comics collectively. I actually stopped ordering previews, and I'm becoming a lot more selective. And I feel a lot of stories to some degree are boring and they're repeating a lot of stuff. I think television is repeating a lot of stuff. I think I'm a big anime fan. I think it's repeating a lot of stuff. And I'm like, I don't know if there's original concepts all that often anymore. And it's a real problem for me as a consumer. And I'm curious where you guys see it, because like in novels, I have a fucking hard time finding books that I haven't read and that I don't know how they're going to end.
Yeah, I mean, so my opinion is I don't think that there's any shortage or difference in good ideas or creative ideas and stories. The problem is that it's so easy these days, regardless of what it is, comics, TV shows, movies. It's so much easier these days for people to make content that those good shows, the good content, has to fight so much harder just to get noticed, to get picked up and seen. And people do get fatigued. You know, when you go out and you pledge to 15, 20 crowdfunding things for comics.
And one of them's good.
And one of them's good. And then you run out of money and then you don't have any money left for the rest of the year. You're like, oh, great. So, I mean, it's a blessing that we can make things a lot easier, but it's also a curse in the same way that everybody else can also make it. And if the content isn't good, it's just that whole watering down of the entire industry, right? Everything kind of comes down.
That's for me. It's you know, I honestly don't buy as much from Kickstarter. I let everybody else be the beta, and then I rely on like the word of mouth. You know, I feel like the word of mouth is personally very important to me, and I think it's only going to increase because of that. Like you both just said, that there's so much content out there that it's getting harder to trust, you know, to just take that jump in. I'd rather hear from Dan or other friends like, oh, this is really good. Then I'll go out and buy it on my own. Like, oh, he was right. It was really good. It takes a lot for me to just find a book or, either graphic novel or novel and just buy it just because I find it interesting on its premise, because I've been burned so many times, you know?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I don't recommend many animes to people. I don't recommend many books. So me and my best friends, we joke about stuff, and like we'll go see like a movie in the movie theater, like an anime thing, and we'll take a whim on it. Like, oh, that looks cool, right? And it's $12. A $12 going to see a movie with my friends is not a big risk. And if the movie sucks, like we saw the Deer King in anime, and it was okay. It was okay. It wasn't great. But then we saw Pompo the Cinephile. That was great. And so you win some, you lose some, but we didn't go on any recommendations. But when I recommend a book to my friends, and I'm like, I recommended Punch Escrow, and I'm like, you got to read this book. And every time I recommend a book to my friends, because I don't recommend many, maybe every 2 years I recommend a book to my friends, my friend was like, yeah, you're right. Because I don't recommend many books to people.
Well, and to your point, you mentioned the key word is the time. You know, so there's the money aspect of buying any of these things that we're talking about. That's a point of purchase. But then 2 hours for a movie versus a novel, you know, that could be a number of hours to read. So now you've lost on both ends.
My friend was like, oh, dude, you were right on this book. Yeah. You were right. But like, the last book I recommended to him was 2 years ago, which was Punch Escrow. And he's like, I get it now. And he's like, you were right. you were right. And before that, I recommended Ready Player One. He's like, yeah, you were right. You were right. But like, again, I've known one of my best friends for 24 years. In the time, I've recommended 3 shows to him, and I've recommended maybe 4 books. That is not a lot of recommendations.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that also matters, is that how often does somebody recommend something? And also, are they being paid to recommend it? Because that's another thing. That's a big problem, where there's a lot of pay to play going on. And I know, because I've seen it, and people have offered to pay me to write articles about their comics.
And that's one of those where you have to trust the reviewer. Like you said, if you've given out four reviews, that carries a lot more weight, right?
It's kind of like the time I did stand-up comedy. A reporter said, here's how it works. You write the review and I'll publish it. I must say, 7 stars all the way. I was appalled by his response, but boy, did I get a good review that day. It's a great joke. That's a great joke. It's a great joke. It's a great joke. It's not mine. I wish it was, because I totally just plagiarized that joke. The guy from Britain's Got Talent did that joke. Brilliant comedian. Very funny, but very true. But yes.
So, yeah. I mean, if you just look at Netflix, it's kind of the same thing, right? There's so much stuff on Netflix, and it just, like, some of it's not even good. I don't know why they put it on there, but they did. And now I don't know if it's good until I watch it. And then, like Matt, like you're saying, now I've just wasted an hour or 2 hours of my life, as opposed to, like, if there was some way to know things were good ahead of time. I don't know.
I mean, yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky. I just watched that John Cena, Jackie Chan movie, and it wasn't a good movie. I was entertained, but it wasn't good. I was also doing social media while I was watching it, so I had to put something on anyway in the background, but it wasn't good. It wasn't good. It was quite bad, to be honest. Would I like to see a sequel? Absolutely. But because, again, it occupied 2 hours of my time while I was doing a task that was miserable. But like, yeah, I mean, it was something that I didn't have to pay attention to. Versus like Extraction, you need to pay attention to that movie, because that movie was great. Both of them were great.
Well, it goes back to expectation, right? What you went in for. That
is true. True. I will concede. But yeah, so I mean, we should. I think I covered everything I wanted to cover as far as the business side of stuff. And then I don't know how you guys feel about everything that's going on with a bunch of other stuff in the Kickstarter land, like everything wrong with Kickstarter. But I digress.
I mean, like you said, it's one place where you go and you can sell stuff, but also have other places where you can sell.
Right. Yeah, I just think that a reckoning is coming, and I think it's going to get a lot uglier than people realize. And I also think that there's let me ask you guys how you feel about this. Where I feel that Kickstarter, and I'm in this business where I sell a lot of bad girl art, and I don't see it going away. But I also think that has somewhat ruined comics, because that is what really sells on Kickstarter right now, is bad girl art. And if you have a bad girl art cover, and we've seen it with Bad Buck is a good example. Pat does them, Tom Hutchinson does them, and all these people have been on my show. Ruben Romero does them, Casey Baker does them, Rebauker, Greg Will Watson is a big artist who does stuff like that. I could keep on going. I like all these people. I know all these people, and I don't think they're gonna have a problem with me saying this, but it sells. And I feel that has somewhat ruined and has damaged comics to some degree, because people go to Kickstarter saying, I don't want to read the book. I just want a limited 100 of this book because it looks awesome. And I want it for my personal collection, or I want to flip it, which is what I do, because somebody wants it for their personal collection, or it becomes a speculative asset. And I had Dustin Burnell on, and I think flippers are necessary because they do determine value of a book, which ultimately increases a book. But there's also damage that is done from what I do, without a doubt.
It works for them. Go for it.
Right.
Let me ask you this: if somebody had a first edition of your book, right? What did you sell it for the first round when you did your campaign?
I'm sorry. Say that again.
What did you sell your graphic novel, the first edition, when it first came out 3 years ago?
The price?
Yeah, the price.
So the Kickstarter was $20.
So let's say that you had
$25, I think.
So let's say that you sold it for 25, and now somebody has a mint first edition. It's going for 100.
Yeah.
Isn't that good for your book and your brand, right? Because while you're not seeing that $100, it does create a perceived value that if you get a first edition of something that you put out there, that it has more value. And so now somebody might say, cool, the first edition is on the Kickstarter. Let me go and run and grab it.
I don't know. And I'm trying to be politically correct about my answer.
Because that's fine. In which that's actually a perfectly acceptable.
Yeah, I don't want to yuck on somebody else's yum. In that case that you said, though, they're not buying, for example, my book because they like what's inside my book. They're buying it because of the cover. So I don't know that it actually helps my book.
But the reason why I say this is that what if somebody says, look, I think this could become a Netflix show. And if I have a first edition of your book, that means it has value, right? Versus a second edition or a third print edition. Do you get where I'm going with this? Because a first edition of a book is very different. So a first edition of Game of Thrones, like the first edition, is worth real money. It could be worth $1,600 to $3,200. If you go to Barnes and Noble and pick it up, that book's not worth anything. And so that's why this gets interesting, where now all of a sudden somebody's selling a first edition of your graphic novel for a lot more than what it's worth. The next time you release something that's a first edition, it might naturally draw attention to it. So you're like, I missed the first edition. God fucking damn it. And now I can't miss the second one. And that's what happens with first appearances, things of that nature. It drives traffic. And so it's not a direct equivalent, but that's what I feel sometimes happens with Bad Girl Art, is that it's limited, and I think it's good. And I think it's really
two different things, right? Like, because it on the one hand, it rewards good creators. If like you said, somebody has a first edition and there's buzz growing, like getting like the first Walking Dead #1, right? Those are impossible to find, kind of thing. Because it was so limited, that rewards the good creator. If you're manipulating the market, so to speak, with like Bad Girl Art or whatever, it's like like an asset class, like a commodity, that it's not providing dividends per se, but it is built on the assumption that it will be worth more. So it'll make things frothier, and people can, it may be good for the industry. I think it's good when it helps the industry and the creator, if that makes sense.
I agree to some, in which I think that if you have a limited 100, Greg Bo Watson cover, I think that's good. When that thing sells, if it was sold for 25 and then it sells for 35, and it obviously has value, I think that the limited position of it is what creates it, and exclusivity, I think, is key in that circumstance. Because what's really valuable is that it's not that I don't think you're manipulating the market. I think that there's only 100 of these and 200 people want it, and they sold out. That's where the value is perceived. When somebody prints 10,000 copies of that book, then you have a different thing. But it's complicated, and this is one of the big debates that's going on right now, is that how do you fund your book, and what do you need to do to fund your book, but how do you keep integrity? And I think it's a real struggle. I don't have that problem because I'm not in the creation business. I just want to sell product to people who want it, and I want to make more, and I want the ability to buy a book for $6 and sell for 12.
So to go back to your question and to what I was answering before, I don't know. I'm curious. Are people buying those books because they like the content and the story in the book, or are they buying it because they like the cover? Because I've seen a lot of campaigns out there where 90% of the Kickstarter is just the covers, and then they have like 2 pages of the interior. So is it helping the creators, or are people just buying the cover?
It's a few things. So I'll give you an example, right? Let's say that I produced a book, right? And my whole expenditure to produce a book was $3,500 for the interiors, right? So to get to that point, let's table printing for 1 second on this. But actually, let's include printing. Let's say printing is $1,000, right? For whatever reason, it's $1,000. We're going to keep simple numbers. I need $4,500 to raise to break even. So obviously the book's done. So I deployed $3,500. And then if I have a Greg Bo Watson, a Steph Wilson, and a Mike DeBaffo, I don't think any of those people are going to mind me mentioning their names. And if they do, I'm sorry. If all of a sudden that now gets me $8,000, those 3 covers, and those people who bought those covers never open up the book, but then I have 100 readers who did open up the book, I mean, I did fund and I get to continue the dream. And so now I'm not in the hole. And so from a business standpoint, I would imagine, this is just how I think, is that maybe you got to make a sacrifice where you don't have readers, but you have backers. And now you have money for your second issue. And what you hope for is that some of those people open up the book, or better yet, you send everybody a digital and they're reading it. So now they might be reading it, but they might not be opening up that book. And I think it's a very tricky position, because how do you get the money you need, or how do you get close? So if you need 4,500, you set your goal for $4,000, you do 4,200, you're only down $300. $300. I'm not saying if you're dirt poor and you have no money, $300 is night and day. But if you have a decent job, $300 isn't that far off.
Yeah,
it is manageable. So I think that's part of it. And then I think the people who are buying it are either saying, "Hey, I'm going to spec on this book," or "I'm a fan of this artist," because I'm a fan of certain artists, right? Like I love Sun Kumanaki, I love Keith Garvey. I think John Royal does a great job. So if Sun Kumanaki is on a Kickstarter, I might be interested in her cover because I'm a fan of her work. And so all of a sudden, I back Kickstarters that I know nothing about their project, but I like the art. And there's an artist that I enjoy, or I'm like, I have no idea who this artist is, but this cover looks sick. Right?
Yeah, I mean, and that's what I was mentioning earlier, is that trying to determine, are people just buying it because of the sexy cover, or are they buying it because they actually want the book? And if that matters, I don't know. I don't have enough information to make. There's not enough data for me to make a choice on that.
That's fine. There's nothing wrong with saying I don't know. I was on a business conference today, and they asked me a bunch of questions. I said, I don't have the answer to that, but you know what is? I have to speak to people on my team, and we have this department and this department, and let me get back to you on that, because they need it for their proposal. But guess what? I said, I don't have the answer to that right now.
Yeah.
I just came into my job less than a year ago, and I have to speak to 2 or 3 departments, and I'm going to get back to you on that number. And guess what? I'm going to get back to them. And guess what? The person's like, that makes complete sense that you don't know the answer to a question. That's fine.
As a creator, and I don't know Pat Shan, but I'm familiar with his work.
How dare you not know him?
I don't know. Yeah, I never talked to him. I don't know him.
Get him on the horn.
But I have respect for creators whose content matches essentially what they're advertising, what the cover is. And I know that Pat does erotic books in some cases, so it's a perfect match. What he's putting on the cover matches what's in the interior, so all good. So I appreciate that at least he's actually making the content that he's putting out there, that he's showing on a face.
He also does books that are children's books.
Does he put sexy covers on those?
He does not. That would be very dark, and that would make me laugh.
It would sell books though.
Yeah, until they didn't. Yeah.
I think mommy and daddy would be a little upset. Hey, here's a new cover of the children's book. Here you go. Don't worry, Johnny. I got you. And then he just winks. Yep. Oh, it'd be great.
Maybe that's the new name for it, the mommy and daddy cover.
Here you go, Johnny.
Well, like you guys are talking, it's like integrity or whatever you want to call it. It's like a slippery concept, right? Like in the novel world, it's something ridiculous. Don't quote me on this, but I want to say like 2/3 of every dollar spent on books is on romance novels. And I know friends of friends who they are writers, and to kind of pay the bills, so to speak, they moved into romance writing, which is not really where they started out. Now, who's anyone to judge? They're making stuff that people like. I think that's at the end of the day, that's up to you, up to their personal decision and up to the reader's personal decision.
It's interesting. I mean, do you write to get paid, or do you write because you want to tell a story?
Right. That.
And I mean, we'll use some people. So you both Jamie Tyndall and Pat Chan work really well in this. So Jamie Tyndall does work for hire, and then he does his own creator stuff. And so, if somebody says, "Hey, Jamie, I want a cover," great. I mean, he's doing something, and then that person tells Jamie what they want. Pat writes for Zenescope. He writes for a bunch of other companies. Great. So if Zenescope says, "Hey, Pat, we want you to write Van Helsing," he's writing Van Helsing. Now, he might create the story. He has some guidelines. He has some input, but he's writing Van Helsing for Zenescope. He doesn't own it. But then he'll do something like Private Dance, which was his latest campaign, and that's his book. And so it's very interesting when you write for yourself, or, right now people are really into the erotic stuff and they want that. So is Pat writing also saying, "Hey, I like writing this stuff. It's enjoyable for me to write, but I know it's going to sell and I know I'm going to make money." And that's a really complicated position. I mean, I can go interview porn stars, and I know if I interview porn stars that it will do well on YouTube. I know. The question is that, do I really want to do that every single week? And it's fun to do it every once in a while. Don't get me wrong, but I don't know if it's something that I would want to do every week and take the show and turn it into a porn star show. If I do a porn star every 3 months, it's interesting and I get a spike. You're like, "Oh, that's cool. It's a little bit different in what's going on with Andrew." But do I want to go do that, or do I want to interview a cosplayer who has 1,000 followers on Instagram and have a real conversation? And I mean, if I wanted to have a 1 million YouTube following channel, I know exactly who I would interview to do it. But I don't know if I would have integrity anymore. And it's complicated.
Like what your brand is, right?
That's the thing too, is that, I mean, I don't know also if like how long something like that would last, because easy come, easy go. I've been doing this for 10 years and my brand really hasn't changed. And I'm probably going to be here for the next 30, and it's slowly growing. And I think it's actually pretty stable where I'm at. And so I like to think that I run a show that actually knows who my guests are. And that's important to me. And I don't want to just be Jerry Springer or old school Howard Stern. Like to me, that doesn't work.
And it's killing me. I'm trying to remember an author, and this is back, probably 100 years ago, where he would list on the interior of his his entertainments and then his novels, as in like the ones that he was writing, like, to kind of, I keep using the expression, to pay the bills, and then the ones that, so that potential readers wouldn't be confused between the two. I can't imagine any publisher allowing that nowadays.
No, I mean, that's been a struggle for creators, artists, and writers for a very long time. Is I need to get paid as whoever I am as a creator, and this guy over here is offering me X amount of money to write a sleazy tabloid story. I got rent to pay. What am I going to do? It happens.
I mean, guy who created Cthulhu. I mean, most people don't know. I forget who created Cthulhu.
Lovecraft.
Yeah, Lovecraft. Most people have no idea the guy's story, where the guy had the worst financial luck. He had horrible financial positioning. He went without food on certain days, so that he can mail a letter. And most people have no idea the suffering the man went through. And all these people write these Cthulhu books, and they do it on Kickstarter, and it's actually fucking detrimental to what the guy went through. It's actually fucking horrible, where those people are subjugating his work. And I don't really care if Cthulhu's in the public domain or not, but if you don't know what Lovecraft went through and how much the guy suffered, and the fact that the guy went hungry at night most of his like later life so that he can mail a letter, I mean, you got to be shitting me a brick. And that's
Alan Moore got in a little trouble with that, right?
What would you say?
Alan Moore got in a little trouble with that, right?
Maybe.
With no, he did one and it wasn't so well received. It was a controversial Providence. It was.
I don't know this one.
Oh,
yes. You should probably get it just to experience the horror.
I absolutely should. I just don't know it, and I don't know everything. I mean, I just don't know it. The last thing that I read from Alan Moore was Lost Girls, and that thing was brilliant. That thing was brilliant. It was by him and his wife. Oh my fucking god! What brilliant writing! What brilliant writing!
He's one of my heroes. And so this one I was reading on a train, and you kind of gets worse and worse. And I have an old woman sitting next to me. It's kind of like, yeah, I'm going to have to read this like this, like where I can't have the pages open. It on its surface. I don't want to ruin it. It's very much up to the reader's sensibilities, because I don't want to, say anything controversial like supporting or whatever. But I think I think the literal facts are he tried to make an analogy of women in the comics world. And I think it backfired a little bit on him by people being too literal about it, whereas he was doing a metaphor, if that's the easiest way to say
it. It wasn't Lost Girls, where Lost Girls, for those who haven't read Lost Girls, is Alice is Gen 1, Wendy, so she's 60 plus, and so she basically became a lesbian after being molested by her father's friend and going down the rabbit hole and potentially going crazy is the story of Alice. So she's 60 and she has money and she's in a hotel. Wendy is 40. She has a son in America. She married an older man who's like an engineer. Her son's becoming an engineer and they're in this hotel. And then Dorothy is a hussy. And basically she went from Kansas to Europe. And she was molested by her uncle, and her uncle basically, she blackmailed her uncle, so she got money from her uncle, and she was basically screwing everything on the farm, is what happened. And now she's in Europe, and now you have these three women. You have men coming and going in this who are involved in and out of the war and the scene. They're all having relationships. They're all having relationships with each other, and they're all exploring sexuality and friendships and relationships, and you have generational crossing. And this is all before World War I breaks out. And it's kind of like, cool, what happened after Alice came back from the rabbit hole? What happened after Wendy returned from Neverland? And what happened when Dorothy came back from Oz? And they're all in this hotel in Europe. And they're all having sexual relationships with men, women, and discovering who they are right before World War I breaks out. And it's absolutely brilliant because it's erotic. It's not erotic. And you're like, this kind of makes sense. I could see how all three of these women would end up where they are at. And it's brilliant. It's brilliant. I don't think it's offensive in any which way. And it's just at its best. It's probably better than Watchmen.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah.
It's probably better than both of those books because it is so smart. And it's I don't know how many people heard of Lost Girls. Brilliant, and it's just a beautiful book. It's like a $40 book at Barnes & Noble, hardcover, beautiful, and it will keep you occupied for a good read.
Is that like a graphic novel or a novel? Or
it's a graphic novel, and it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. It's him and his wife did it, and it's so good. It's so good. It is such a beautiful story. The art is fantastic on it. The writing is fantastic on it, and it's everything that you would expect. And you're like, wait, Alan Moore did this? Like, right. What the fuck?
Right, exactly. I trust in him enough to know that it's going to be something special. I'm just not familiar with it.
Oh, I mean, it's absolutely brilliant. It's I think it's his best work.
Wow,
work.
That's a strong statement.
Which people can debate me on, but
right.
I'm more than happy to have that debate.
Yeah.
But I really think it's his best work. It's my favorite book he ever did.
Okay.
more so than V for Vendetta, more so than. I mean, he did V for Vendetta, right?
Oh yeah. Watchmen, of course. Yeah, Swamp Thing.
Yeah. I'm making sure. V for Vendetta is the one that always
with the mask. Yeah.
That one always it's complicated. I forget that Alan Moore does that. I know he did Watchmen, but brilliant. But anyway, I digress.
Yeah.
I can go on for hours on Lost Girls because I love. It is the ultimate Neverland, Wonderland, and Oz story.
That's fun that he took those characters and kind of built them out differently like that.
It's fun that he did that, and it's fun that he did the age generational gap with them because that's what makes that special. It's not just that Alice is 20, Wendy's 20, and Dorothy's 20 or 19. It's the fact that they're all approaching life in different fashions, and they all have similar and different problems, and they're all in this hotel. And there you go. You have a really interesting dichotomy because a 19-year-old does not think like a 40-year-old, and a 40-year-old does not think like a 60-year-old. And they all think differently. And Alice is at the end of her life, Wendy's in the middle, and Dorothy's at the beginning. And now you have this weird dichotomy, and all these weird things happening. And the fact that Wendy is in a stable relationship, Alice is a lesbian, and she's never been with a man before, and Dorothy is legitly screwing every man she could see. I mean, you have a complicated situation going on, let alone every other thing that happens in that book.
I'm trying to remember the publication dates on some of the sources. I wonder if that's where he derived the ages from, from Alice in Wonderland with C.S. Lewis and, Wizard of Oz and stuff. I just can't remember the dates of them.
Alice in Wonderland was probably published first. Because the Wizard of Oz was published in
I'm terrible with that stuff. I don't know dates.
Yeah. Because the Wizard of Oz was going on to a silver currency, and that was a lot of what Frank I can't think of his name. So I mean, I used to know a lot more about this too. I know Wizard of Oz than anything else. But I digress. But Anyway, we should probably talk about rewards. totally just got out of that.
Well, that's how this goes, right? With the digressions that you never know where you're going to end up, right?
It was a quell.
Yes. Yep. Full circle.
It's gonna be a lot of fun to cut this one up. I'm looking forward. The amount of short content I'm gonna get out of this is gonna be like 20 pieces.
But see, if that's cut out now you have to do the quell explanation earlier. Oh, it's not gonna make sense.
Well, I'm not gonna cut up the interview. I'm gonna cut up into micro content so people just get it randomly. It's gonna be great. There's so much content every week now. It's insane. I release like 25 videos a week of all my content because I have all these interviews, and it's weird because people want to watch 2 or 3 minute clips, and that's where all my views come from. Is that my views don't come from the interview anymore itself. It actually comes from the micro content that links back to the interview, and each interview tells a lot of impressions apparently on the internet now, which is wild. But I digress. Going to rewards. I know you got the standard book. I know you have both books. I know you got the retail bundle, and then you got the limited edition. What's the deal with that one? Because that's like a foil thing, right?
Yeah. I'm only doing 25 books. 20 of them are going to be available through the Kickstarter. I'm going to print them with foil covers, so it'll be shiny, kind of metallic holograph looking thing. It's a little bit different than the standard cover. There's some extra details in there. And like I said, that's going to be it. I'm going to hand number them on the inside. So, when you get yours, you have 1 of 20 or you have 1 of 20, whatever the number is. So hopefully it'll be very unique, something cool for collectors.
Yeah, no, I like it. I think it's smart. I think it's really good. I think that's good. And I think you sold a bunch of them, right?
Sold a few. I would like to sell more.
Let me ask this because I'm curious. Are you actually going to print 25 of them, or
yes.
Is it the order? So no matter which way you cut it, there's going to be 25 of them. So 25 or less, essentially.
I'm going to do 25. If I sell 5 through the Kickstarter, then the other ones I will sell my own self. However, I can put them on my website. I can sell them on eBay.
I asked the question because there's print to order. So I buy cards that are print to order. And so if only 6 people order it, only 6 cards will get printed. If 96 people order it, 96 cards are printed. It's a very cool thing. If 2,700 people order it, 27 cards are printed. That's why I asked the question, is because when you cap it at 25, it's not print to order. It's I'm printing 25.
Yeah.
And if 25 sell out, we're good to go, guys.
Nope. That's it. So I like in the art world, right? If you are into fine arts and things like that, artists will make prints. It's not the original, but it's a limited edition print. And they, like I said, they hand sign, hand number each one. So they'll never be made again. And as a collector, I have 5 of 25 and somebody else out there has 6, but I got 5. So that's kind of what makes it special.
It's kind of like baseball cards that are numbered, that are parallels, where I have like 5 of 5s, 10s, 7 out of 10, things like that, which are super cool. There's a reason why I asked that question, because I think it is important on a collector's level to know, hey, I know there's only 25 of these books out there and I have one of them. So, and then I know you also have original art, I think, is up for grabs if it hasn't already sold out.
Yep. That's so that's my most expensive tier. So I'm offering the book and then also one of the original art pages that I drew for the book. Each one is, of course, 11 by 17 on the board. You can see all the ink lines and everything. You can feel I think this is the cool part. You can feel the bumps because I use actual India ink and stuff like that. So a lot of times when artists use pens like microns, I mean, they're markers, right? So that just makes very smooth lines. But when you use like a nib pen like I use, you can feel the bumps like Braille, actually. You can feel the lines. It's kind of neat.
That is cool. That is cool. So when somebody gets it, should they take thumbtacks and put it on their bulletin board?
Just make sure you put the holes right in the middle where the art is.
It's the only way to make them stay. Yeah.
Yeah. The little diagonal tape on the corners to stick it to the wall.
Otherwise, it just spins. Yeah.
I couldn't help it. I'm sorry. I just couldn't. Every time somebody sells original art, I just couldn't help it. I'm sorry, everybody. I'm sorry. It was too easy. It was just like, it's like forbidden fruit for me to eat. But I digress. And then obviously you have a retail package as well that I think is interesting, which is also incredibly important. And I think more people need to figure out a retail package. And if you're a comic shop, and I think what are you selling, like 5 books for $45 or around that price?
Yes.
So, I mean, if you're a comic shop, it's not a bad deal if you will get, 5 books for $45?
Yep.
So it's not bad. In which that, I mean, how much are you selling this book for?
I will determine that for sure. But
what's the pledge on Kickstarter?
The pledge on Kickstarter is $20 for the standard book, and it includes shipping.
So I mean, 5 books is $100. So obviously, if you're what?
It's less than half. It's $9 a book if you're buying the retail versus.
That's where I'm going with it.
Yeah.
That's exactly where I'm going with it. Is that for a retailer, obviously, it is a bigger profit.
Huge. Yeah.
Where they're making enough that suffices the sale and the retail space it takes up. And this is one of the biggest problems with retail is when I buy retail, I need enough room on the bone for me to eat. So if you have a $20 book and you're selling me a retail package for $15, there's no fucking money for me to eat on that steak or your book, whatever you want to call it. There's no room. If you sell it for me for 10, there's a little bit of room. If I get it for 8, there's a lot more room and I feel a lot more comfortable. So this is the biggest problem with retail. And I feel a lot of people in comics do not speak to retailers and say, look, what works for you? Because it could very well be that retail doesn't work in certain circumstances. But
selling them for $45, you don't need to sell every single one. There's not that pressure, right?
or you don't need to sell them as fast.
Right.
Meaning that if you sold 3 of them for 20, you are in and out of that trade, and great. Now you are at the break-even point relatively quickly. And that's what I think everybody forgets, is that, that's the problem. Or even if you sell 2 of them for 20, you're closer to the break-even point, and this way your shop isn't going to sink.
Right.
Because I hate to say it, but if you buy merch that doesn't move, and I know this because I have merch that doesn't move, if you do not have safety nets or merch that's moving, it will sink your shop. And I've been there. It's not fun. It's not fun.
Yeah, and it's a very similar deal to the ones that I make in person when I talk to comic book shops, and they stock it for me. So I totally understand what the shops are going through and the whole profit thing that they have to do. So I get it.
But I digress. I could go on retail for hours, and I'm going to be hosting a comic book hangout in September. We're probably going to talk about retail and retail packages, and we're going to have an open, honest discussion about it, everybody. It's going to be fascinating. It's going to be a real discussion with a bunch of different angles, because I think that's what I do every month now. I have a comic book hangout where we talk about real issues. Self-plug right there. And the last one went really well. We talked about what is working, what isn't working in comics for like an hour and a half. It was a fascinating discussion, and it was good. John Westhoff was there. Tyrone Jackson was there. Aaron Dowan was there. It was a good discussion. And I don't know who's coming on for the next one. I think Timothy B. Fling is coming, and I need to find 2 other people to talk about retail, which will be fascinating because, again, I want difference of opinions. Like, I would love to have a comic shop on. I think it'd be interesting to hear their perspective. But I digress. But enough about that. I do want to give everybody a chance to self-promote themselves. We've been speaking for almost 2 hours, and it's been fascinating. I'm pretty sure we could speak about another 2 hours just about Alan Moore. Very easily. I could go on for hours about Lost Girls very easily, and Watchmen and V for Vendetta. But and Swamp Thing, of course.
Yeah.
Because how can you not talk about Swamp Thing? Swamp Thing is all we got.
So now we're getting into those other comics again, right?
So go back my Kickstarter, Worms Crawl Out. It's available now. It's running through September 1st or 2nd. Retail tiers, shipping in the U.S. is in the pledge. Go back. You can find me at Instagram, Dan_Schmidt Art. You can see on the screen there. On Facebook, you can go to my page, Worms Crawl In, Worms Crawl Out. I'm on Global Comics. All that stuff. Matt, where are you?
I'm at MatthewWaterman.com. Anybody actually interested in the novels? These are what they look like: Ends of the World and Ends of the Worlds. You read that right. Similar, they complement. They are not necessary. It's not necessary to buy both. It's all there on the website. Go check it out, and would love to talk about that too. So.
Yeah, and then I've been just saying it for a while, and I'm going to keep saying it. Almost 4 years now. You have to support indie, and what that means is that when Kickstarters are active with people, you need to go actually back those campaigns. And let's say that you miss a campaign, or somebody has another book or another comic, and you don't like their particular book. You should go buy their comic on their web store or wherever it's being sold, or if they're at a con, you should go buy something from their table. Because all that helps. And whether you're buying the comic or buying another comic, it indirectly helps to support what they're creating in that particular month, year, quarter, cycle, whatever you want to call it. Furthermore, let's say that you've backed everything and that you currently back their project. You should be following them on social media. Twitter's a big deal. Instagram's a big deal, or X, as it's now called, is a big deal. Facebook is a big deal. TikTok is a big deal, as well as YouTube. It's very important, and you should interact with them, because that is just as important, and you should actually share out the campaign. And sharing out your campaign on a Facebook wall goes a long way, and you might not think it does, but it really does in a lot of ways, because you never know who's going to see it. You never know who's going to experience it. You never know who's going to check it out, and it's extremely important. And it goes a huge way. So that's something to keep in the back of everybody's head. And it's free to share things out and like things. So, and I guarantee you that if you interact with creators, there's a good chance they'll interact back. In my experience with people, that's usually how it works. So that's just something to keep in mind. As far as I'm concerned, everything that I'm doing, I am on X/Twitter at Pop Anime Comics. I'm on Instagram at Pop Anime Comics. I am on Facebook at Pop Anime Comics. You can Google conversations in pop culture. It should pop up. You could also go to Pop Anime Comics on YouTube. TikTok is Pop Anime Comics. And you can interact with me on any of those social media sites. If you shoot me a message on X, or you shoot me a message on Facebook, or you shoot me a message on Instagram, and you're like, hey, I saw your show, really enjoyed it, or you interact with me on YouTube, I'm probably going to respond back. If you just are polite about it and all that stuff. So yeah, that's what I do. And then also I have an eBay store where I buy and sell a lot of really expensive comics, and I have 3 metal comics dropping in the next few days, and they're a little spicy. And let's just say if you're a Resident Evil fan, you're going to want them. And I only have 3, one of each, and they're limited to 25 or less. And so that's something to keep in the back of your head. And they're going to be a little pricey and a little spicy. So all I'm going to say is that somebody saved the president's daughter from a maniacal beret-wearing individual. So if you know who that is, feel free to let me know. But that's all I have. And I don't know who wants to have the last word.
Yep, there we go. Last word.
There we go.
I don't think I could have said that any better myself, everybody. And that's a wrap.